As you build your business, you obviously want to make sure that others are convinced that you are doing the right thing. You want to make sure that you have enough customers and you have the potential to make enough money that this business is going to be successful. You may discover that there is a market that really wants your product or service, that really faces the problem, but if there isn't enough customers and if they don't have enough money, it's never going to be successful. This is a business killer. The TAMS approach can be a really powerful tool to help you understand and calculate your market size. And while these numbers may not always be completely accurate because you're always learning and developing your market, it's a really useful thinking tool for you and your team. Often calculating your TAMS can figure out some potential holes in your numbers and give you a clearer picture as to what the potential for your idea is. You might be thinking, why would I need these calculations? And there's a number of different occasions. One of them might be in investor pitch decks. If you are going to try and seek investment or you're looking for other business partners, a key question you're going to be asked is, what is your potential market? This is your TAMS number. Another one might be through your business plan, if your bank is asking, or if other suppliers or partners are asking. This might be something that you need to present in that area. Another benefit is getting your team aligned, making sure you have a similar ambition level and you have a goal for how big you want this business to be. It can be useful if you are going for different competitions and grants, and it's a really useful way of testing your price point to see if it has potential in the market, and as an exercise to evaluate yourself against the competitors and the wider market. So how do you calculate your total addressable market? This is your TAM, and the easiest way to do it is by multiplying the number of potential customers you have with their price point. A key point about doing this is you have to set your boundaries. If you might be a company with a portfolio of products or services, you can't necessarily easily just calculate the TAM for your entire company, because each price point for each different product or service is different, as well as the number of customers. So if you add it all together, it becomes a really big, broad number that doesn't make sense. So you need to make sure you divide it up and do your TAM for each individual element of your business. Then you can add it up together and show that your wider portfolio is working in a larger market. But for each product, each service, each business, they need their own different calculations. When calculating your TAM, it is so tempting to just put your customer as potentially the whole world or a whole market. Every human being on the planet could buy our product, therefore we are worth trillions of dollars. But that's not realistic, and what investors and bankers will be looking for is a really clear and realistic number as to who and how much you are targeting them to make sure your business is viable. The two components of calculating your TAM are your customers and your pricing. With your customers, these have to be people who are relevant to your product or service. Yes, TAM is a big number that encapsulates everyone with the potential to buy your product or services, but they have to be in the right geography, they have to have the right access to money, and they have to have the same demand for the problem to make sure they can fit into this number. Using Uber as an example, when they are doing this calculation, they could in theory think about every traveller in the world as their potential customer. But that's not realistic. They're not going to be using the product all the time, and they're not going to capture 100% of that market. So when Uber actually did this calculation in their first pitch deck, they looked at taxi users in the US. They limited it geographically. They didn't include car rentals, they didn't include travellers all around the world. They focused it, and still that was a very big market to try and capture. Once you come up with your total potential customers for your TAM calculation, that is a realistic but still pretty large number of possible customers, you then multiply that by your price. With your TAM calculation, you're typically looking for a market value for the year, but your price figure likely won't represent a year. Customers perhaps pay monthly or they pay one-off. So you need to figure out the price calculation that is relevant to the time scale of your TAM calculation. In order to get an accurate price figure for this calculation, you might need to look at how your customers buy your products or services over the period of a year, for example. So if it's a monthly payment, maybe you need to take the monthly subscription and multiply it by 12. If the customers pay different amounts throughout the year, you might need to look at an average amount. Or perhaps you need to have a look at how much and how often your customers pay for your products. You're trying to figure out all of this to get an average single number for the average customer and how much they would pay for your product or service. This can be incredibly hard to define when you don't have any sales yet, and you can have a look at some competitor figures, but make sure you are focusing these numbers on what you will genuinely be charging for your product. Going back to Uber as an example, when they were trying to calculate this figure, they used national reports of usage per minute of taxi and limousine services in the US, and were able to see how much per minute customers were spending and how often they were using it. They were then able to introduce their own pricing and combine their price information with some demographic and user data across the whole country to come to a really clear figure as to how much per minute the customer would be using in their taxis. Using these figures in their official first pitch deck, Uber estimated their TAM at 4.2 billion. They then went on to look at their SAM and their SOM and calculate it even further down, because their initial market was the entire US, but they actually only focused on San Francisco and Manhattan as their first locations, and that gave a smaller, more realistic customer base that they were going to start with. Let's look at some top tips for calculating your market size. Start by not overestimating from research. Yes, you want to do a mix of top-down by using market research and insight reports to get information you might not have, but you also need to do bottom-up. This is using your own information about what your customers and what your prices are going to do. If you simply look at the market, you're going to get some crazy figures like the size of this market is X billion dollars, and if we can get 1% of that market, we'll have a market valuation of X. That's not realistic. You're not able to get those big figures. They're not relevant to you and your business. So yes, do your research, but make sure everything is completely applied to you and your business. If investors see these big trillion-dollar figures as your potential market, they will laugh you out of the room. Another tip when looking to calculate your market size is to not focus always on the problem. In other parts of your pitch deck, you might be saying X amount of people face this issue and that's why it's a really big growing market. That is true, but that is not your market size. That's the problem size. Your market is how many people are willing to pay to have that problem solved, and who are very specifically going to pay for your product at your price point. So you do need to focus it down. Yes, the number of people facing the problem may form into your calculation, but you do need to be more specific to focus on who will buy your solution. When looking at your market size, you also need to make sure you don't consider the entire market. Whatever your product or service is, you are going to be targeting a specific part of it. So by having a fact like the e-commerce industry is worth X billion dollars, it's not very useful because you're not going to be selling to the entire e-commerce industry. You're looking to figure out the market size of your section, such as the e-commerce industry for second-hand jewelry. That makes sense to try and include that in your calculations. Another top tip is whenever you're presenting your market slide, always try to make sure that you are presenting your workings on those slides. Yes, a big fancy number is useful, but what tells an even stronger story about your credibility and attention to detail is showing where those customer numbers came from and how you calculated them and where that price figure came from. An investor is going to be far more impressed if you have the answers to their detailed questions about your market size than they will be if you have a big number on a screen and have no idea where it came from. Always be prepared and always have your workings ready. Your goal as an entrepreneur is to prove that you are working on a scalable business that has a sizable market with the potential to make money. If your goal is to scale and become an international startup, then you don't want your market size to be too small, otherwise investors might not be willing to give you money. Equally, you also don't want your market size to be far too big and unrealistic, because it proves you maybe haven't done your research in as much detail as possible. What you're looking for is a market size that fits your ambition level, which can be small or it can be large, but that is realistic, that helps you understand who your customers are and what price you're going to charge to allow you to make really sensible business decisions about where to go next with your products and services.